When we think of ancient medicine, our minds often conjure up images of superstition, of strange rituals and bizarre beliefs. We picture doctors who were more like magicians, using potions made of questionable ingredients, chanting incantations to drive out evil spirits, and prescribing remedies that seem utterly nonsensical to our modern scientific eyes. It's easy to dismiss it all as primitive folklore. But what if one of the oldest and most detailed medical texts in the world contained a secret so strange and so surprisingly accurate that it would take modern science 3,500 years to figure out why it worked? This is the story of a 3,500-year-old papyrus scroll, a mysterious medical test involving nothing more than some grain seeds and a clay pot, and the startling discovery that the ancient Egyptians had invented a functional and surprisingly effective pregnancy test. The Doctor's Scroll. Our story begins not in a laboratory, but in the dusty archives of ancient Egypt. The knowledge we have of their medical practices comes from a series of incredible documents, the medical papyri. These are the preserved textbooks and clinical notes of ancient Egyptian physicians, written in hieratic script on long scrolls of papyrus. One of the most famous of these is the Ebers Papyrus. It is a true behemoth, a single unbroken scroll over 20 meters, that's 65 feet long, dating to around 1550 BC. It's a comprehensive medical encyclopedia containing over 700 magical spells and practical remedies for everything from digestive problems and eye diseases to crocodile bites. But the specific text that concerns our story comes from a collection of documents known as the Carlsberg Papyrus Collection, as well as other gynecological texts. These papyri contain some of the most detailed information we have about ancient Egyptian knowledge of women's health, fertility, and childbirth. And buried within these ancient texts is a simple, straightforward set of instructions for a very important diagnosis. Here's a translation of the procedure, found in several papyri from around 1350 BC, to see if a woman will bear or will not bear. You should put some barley and some emmer wheat into 2 separate cloth bags, and the woman should moisten them with her urine every day. The bags should be treated the same as dates. If the barley grows, it means it will be a male child. If the emmer wheat grows, it means it will be a female child. If neither of them grows, she will not bear. Let's break that down. A woman who suspected she might be pregnant was instructed to urinate on a mixture of barley and emmer wheat seeds over the course of several days. If the seeds began to sprout and grow, she was pregnant. If they didn't, she was not. As an added bonus, the test even claimed to be able to predict the sex of the child based on which grain grew more vigorously. For centuries, Egyptologists and historians who studied these texts treated this passage as a fascinating but fanciful piece of folklore. It seemed like a classic example of what anthropologists call sympathetic magic. The logic appears to be purely symbolic. The fertility of the woman's body, if she is pregnant, is magically transferred to the seeds, causing them to germinate. The connection between the seeds and the child was purely metaphorical. It was a beautiful and poetic idea, but surely it couldn't actually work. It was filed away alongside spells to cure headaches and incantations to ward off evil spirits. An interesting insight into the ancient Egyptian mind, but not a piece of functional medicine. As it turns out, this assumption was completely wrong. The science behind the magic. The first hint that there might be more to the Egyptian test than just magic came in 1963. A group of researchers, intrigued by the ancient prescription, decided to put it to the test in a modern laboratory. They wanted to see if this 3,500-year-old piece of folklore had any basis in scientific reality. The methodology of their experiment was simple and designed to mimic the ancient instructions. They collected urine samples from a group of 40 women who were confirmed to be pregnant, and for control groups they collected urine from 20 women who were not pregnant, as well as from 25 men. They then used these individual urine samples to water separate pots containing a mixture of wheat and barley seeds. They observed the pots over several days, carefully recording any signs of germination and growth. The results were absolutely stunning. The urine from the men and the non-pregnant women had no positive effect on the seeds. In fact, in many cases, it seemed to inhibit their growth, which is not surprising. as urine is a waste product and can be toxic to plants in high concentrations. But the urine collected from the pregnant women told a completely different story. In a significant number of cases, the urine from pregnant women dramatically accelerated the germination and growth of the seeds. The ancient test actually worked. When they tallied the final numbers, the researchers found that the ancient Egyptian method was about 70% accurate at determining if a woman was pregnant. While that's not as precise as the 99% accuracy of modern tests, for the ancient world, 70% was a medical miracle. It was far, far better than random chance. The Egyptians had stumbled upon a real, valid biological phenomenon, so the next and much more difficult question was, why did it work? The answer has to do with the massive hormonal changes that occur in a woman's body during pregnancy. When a modern woman takes a home pregnancy test, the test is looking for one specific hormone, human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG. This hormone is produced by the placenta shortly after implantation, and its levels skyrocket in early pregnancy. It's the pregnancy hormone, and it's excreted in the urine. However, HCG is a protein-based hormone, and it doesn't appear to have any significant growth-promoting effects on plants. So HCG wasn't the answer. The real key to the ancient test lies with a different set of hormones, estrogens. During pregnancy, a woman's body is absolutely flooded with incredibly high levels of estrogen, a steroid hormone that is crucial for maintaining the pregnancy and for the development of the fetus. The estrogen levels in a pregnant woman's urine can be many, many times higher than in a non-pregnant woman. And here's the amazing part. Plants also produce and use their own steroid hormones to regulate their growth. The plant equivalent of animal steroids are called brasinosteroids. These plant hormones are vital for processes like cell division, cell elongation, and crucially for seed germination. It turns out that the molecular structure of animal estrogens is similar enough to the structure of these plant-based brasinosteroids that they can, in some cases, bind to the same receptors in the plant cells and mimic their effects. So when the ancient Egyptian woman urinated on the seeds, if she was pregnant, she was essentially dousing them with a powerful, hormone-rich fertilizer. The high concentration of estrogens in her urine was acting as a potent plant growth promoter, stimulating the seeds to sprout. If she wasn't pregnant, her urine had much lower levels of estrogen and lacked this stimulating effect. The Egyptians, of course, had no knowledge of hormones or molecular biology, but through careful observation and centuries of trial and error, they had discovered that there was something different, something life-giving in the urine of a pregnant woman, and they had devised a clever and effective experiment to detect its presence. But what about the second part of the test? The claim that it could predict the baby's sex. The papyrus states, if the barley grows, it will be a male. If the emmer wheat grows, it will be a female. The 1963 study, and other analyses since, have thoroughly investigated this claim as well. And on this point, the ancient Egyptians were completely wrong. Modern testing has shown zero correlation between which grain grows better and the sex of the baby. This part of the test was indeed pure folklore. Why they believed this is a matter of speculation. It might have been a simple guess that became codified as fact, or it could have had a linguistic or cultural origin. Some scholars have pointed out that in ancient Egyptian, the word for barley was similar to the word for father, or man in some contexts, so the association may have been purely symbolic. So, while the core test, the yes-no for pregnancy, was based on real, observable science, the gender prediction was pure superstition. A legacy of uroscopy. The fact that the Egyptian pregnancy test was surprisingly effective helps to explain one of the great puzzles of medical history, its incredible longevity. This wasn't some obscure practice that was forgotten after the fall of the pharaohs. The wheat and barley test was so famous and so trusted that it survived for thousands of years, being passed down from one civilization to the next. The practice of uroscopy, or diagnosing illness by examining a patient's urine, was a cornerstone of medicine for centuries. From the ancient Egyptians and Greeks all the way through the medieval and Renaissance periods in Europe, physicians were often called piss prophets. A doctor's primary diagnostic tool was a special glass flask, which they would use to hold a patient's urine up to the light. They would meticulously examine its color, clarity, and sediment. They would even smell it, and in some cases taste it to check for sweetness, which was a sign of what we now know is diabetes. Elaborate urine wheels were created, intricate circular charts that linked dozens of different urine colors to a whole host of diseases. Within this long tradition of uroscopy, the Egyptian pregnancy test was passed down as a piece of accepted medical wisdom. It appears in later Greek and Roman medical texts. It's found in the medicine of the Byzantine Empire. It even appears in a German folklore text from as late as 1699. For over 3,500 years, this method remained one of the most common ways for a woman to try and confirm a pregnancy. It certainly stands out when compared to some of the other, more bizarre pregnancy tests that were used throughout history. In ancient Greece, a woman might undergo the onion test. A physician would place an onion or another strong-smelling bulb in her vagina and leave it there overnight. If her breath smelled of onion in the morning, it was taken as a sign that she was not pregnant. The logic, flawed as it was that if she were pregnant, the womb would be closed, preventing the smell from traveling up through her body to her mouth. For centuries, piss prophets would mix a woman's urine with wine and observe the changes. The alcohol would react with proteins in the urine, causing it to change color or clarity, though the results were highly unreliable. As late as the 1920s, before the discovery of hormones, the most advanced method was the rabbit test. In this procedure, a woman's urine was injected into a female rabbit. A few days later, the rabbit was killed and dissected. If the rabbit's ovaries showed certain changes, it meant the woman was pregnant. The test worked because the HCG hormone in the pregnant woman's urine stimulated the rabbit's ovaries. It was effective, but also slow, expensive, and required the sacrifice of an animal for every test. This long and often strange history really puts the Egyptian achievement into perspective. Their wheat and barley test was non-invasive, it was cheap and accessible, grain was everywhere, and it gave a result in just a few days. And at 70% accuracy, it stood as one of the best and most reliable methods of pregnancy detection available to humanity for over 3 millennia, until the development of modern hormonal tests in the 20th century. The wisdom of the ancients. The story of the Egyptian pregnancy test is a powerful lesson in intellectual humility, and it invites us to re-examine other aspects of ancient medicine that we may have been too quick to dismiss as pure superstition. When we look closely at the same medical papyri that contain the pregnancy test, we find other remedies and practices that also seem to have a legitimate scientific basis. For example, the Egyptians frequently used honey as a dressing for wounds. For a long time, this was seen as a simple folk remedy. We now know that honey is a natural antibiotic and antiseptic. It's hypertonic, meaning it draws moisture out of bacteria, killing them. It's also acidic and contains small amounts of hydrogen peroxide, all of which makes it an incredibly effective agent for preventing infection. The papyri also describe using infusions of willow bark to treat pain and inflammation. This is another practice that was common in folk medicine for centuries. In the 19th century, scientists finally isolated the active compound in willow bark, salicin. This compound was later synthesized to create acetyl salicylic acid, the chemical we all know today as aspirin. Perhaps most controversially, some texts describe applying moldy bread to infected wounds and sores. For years, this was seen as a prime example of primitive, unhygienic thinking. But some historians of medicine have argued that this could represent a form of proto-antibiotic therapy. They didn't know it, but they may have been applying a dressing containing the penicillium mold, the very same fungus from which Alexander Fleming would discover penicillin thousands of years later. Now, this is not to say that we should romanticize ancient medicine. The Egyptian papyri are a fascinating and often contradictory mix of practical, observation-based medicine and pure magic. For every effective remedy like honey, there is a useless or even harmful concoction, made from things like fly droppings or mouse bones. For every keen clinical observation, there is a magical incantation that must be recited to drive out the demon that is causing the illness. The key to understanding their success is to see them not as scientists in the modern sense, but as master observers. They didn't understand the chemistry of hormones, the biology of bacteria, or the pharmacology of salicin. But they did have a powerful methodology, trial and error, practiced and recorded over many centuries. They watched, they recorded, and they remembered what worked. They didn't know why the wheat and barley test worked, but they had clearly observed that, more often than not, it did work. So they wrote it down, and that piece of observational science was so robust that it survived for millennia. The ancient Egyptian pregnancy test is a stunning example of this lost wisdom. It's a reminder that we should not be so quick to dismiss the knowledge of ancient cultures as primitive or irrelevant. Buried within their magical spells and their strange rituals, we can sometimes find nuggets of profound observational science wisdom so advanced that it can take our own civilization thousands of years to catch up and finally understand the chemistry behind the magic. It's a 3,500-year-old secret whispered from a fragile papyrus scroll, a testament to the incredible ingenuity of the ancient world, and a powerful reminder that sometimes the oldest ideas can still have the power to shock, humble, and amaze us.